Hey everybody, Jason Bermas here for wearechange.org, and we've got a very special show for you on 9/11 as the 17th anniversary is coming up. I wanted to bring somebody in who has done so much research on the background of 9/11 and really important research at that. Richard Andrew Grove is going to be with me discussing 9/11, John O'Neill, where we are today. We may get into the war games, the E4Bs, Brent Scowcroft, so much stuff to cover because if you have gotten into 9/11 truth, you know that it is almost an endless rabbit hole of information because of the many different angles that you can take on it. You can look at the hijackers and just look at where they trained, and that's fascinating. You can look at their intelligence connections. That's fascinating. You can look at their FBI connections with Khalid al-Mihdhar, living with and renting from an FBI informant. You can look at the CIA being called on Waleed al-Shi'ari. You can look at so many different angles of this, and Richard Andrew Grove has looked at a lot of them. Let me tell you, I remember the first time I met this gentleman, it was back in 2006, I believe. Actually, maybe been a little bit more. Was it 2005?
It was 2006.
2006. So I don't think it was the 5th anniversary of 9/11 yet. It was coming up. It was in that very first Chicago conference. It's where I met Alex Jones for the very first time. So many people there. Luke Rudowski, Gary Franchi, a lot of the hard hitters that are still here today trying to bring you an alternative voice. And he just kind of mesmerized me. I remember he was talking about all this financial information that I'd heard bits and pieces of, but he'd really put it together. So, Richard, thank you so much for joining us. And, you know, what is your take now that we are almost 17 years away from the event that literally defines our entire foreign and domestic policy today?
Well, not only defined the foreign and domestic policy of the 21st century, but since then it's redefined it. So if you just wait 17 years after an attack, all of a sudden the people who attacked us aren't really the enemy we're fighting anymore, even though we still have a war going on in Afghanistan that is laid at the feet of 9/11. It's the longest running American war in history, so round of applause for that. I still can't understand why we're there guarding what traditionally has been British opium fields, but I'm not a politician, so I guess I can't explain that. I see a culture that is deleteriously heading toward despotism and losing freedom bit by bit as the schools continue to produce people who don't appreciate what it means to be self-reliant and have self-esteem and have real self-confidence and therefore have any type of self-responsibility in the world.
Yeah, and that's the thing. This bleeds into just about everything that we are doing militarily. You know, we're not leaving Syria. The, official line of we were there to get ISIS out, well, that doesn't seem to be the official line anymore. And we all know it's about regime change. It's come out that the CIA had quote-unquote boots on the ground back in 2012. We just never told anybody. It wasn't official forces. We know that there's only one major city left, and the last time there was another big city that hadn't been taken back by Assad, I'm looking at you, Gouda, they screamed chemical attack, Assad, let missiles go. The day after the day that James Mattis sat before Congress and said they had no evidence that a chemical attack even happened, but he believed one happened, and he said, if one did happen, it would still be days or weeks before we could actually affirm that it was Assad.
I believe there was a chemical attack, and we're looking for the actual evidence. The OPCW, this is the Organization for the Chemical Weapons Convention. We're trying to get those inspectors in probably within the week. You know the challenges we face, where Russia has 6 times in the UN rejected and made certain that we could not get investigators in. We will not know from this investigating team that goes in, if we get them in, if the regime will let them in, we will not know who did it. They can only say that they found evidence or did not.
But that sure didn't stop them from bombing. And you had people on the ground like Robert Fisk and Pearson Sharp from OAN. There were 0 signs of a chemical attack. Let me repeat that. 0 signs of a chemical attack. Nobody walking around as if there had been one. No one in protective gear, no doctors that would confirm it. He went to the hospitals. They explained what happened, which was literally a bunch of people dragging children in they had picked up off the streets, dousing them with water for the cameras, and then getting them out of the building. This is the incredible propaganda we live under to this day, Richard, and to me, it really all stems from that one event.
Well, you have to ask a question, why do so many people believe it? I mean, you can see it for what it is because you have a sense of history. I heard you talking on one of your earlier broadcasts in the last 24 hours about Bernays and the guys like Lippmann who came in and shaped culture from the top down and said, we will shape your minds through propaganda using mass media and advertising and then later radio and television. These books were written, I mean, Lippmann and Bernays, they wrote those books 100 years ago. Mm-hmm. And if you don't want to be under the adverse effects of their tutelage, then you got to learn what they said so you can recognize what's going on. And then you're not going to believe the babies in the incubator story or any other type of story that lacks any type of verifiable evidence. You know, if it's not something that's verifiable between me and you, Jason, that I can say, look, you know, here's a pen on the table and you could touch it and verify it's in objective reality. That's meaningful in the conversation. But if I say, here's a unicorn and you can't see it, or here's a pixie or a troll or a gremlin and you can't see it, we don't have much to talk about. So these observations of propaganda, they lack substance. And yet so many people give them attention as if they had substance. I think that's really at the root cause of it.
I think you're right. And you know, one of the prime examples that I noticed in passing in the last couple of months, it took me aback. I had to stop myself, and then
that still happens.
Yeah, it does. You know, even when I'm watching a piece of propaganda. So I'm watching, I believe it was the '90s series. I think it was on A&E. That's kind of the trash television I watch every once in a while. I'll put it on for the live PD or the first 48. You know, if I'm going to watch trash TV, it's usually that. And I believe that they had that '90s series on. And they were talking about the original Iraq War. And just for like 2 to 5 seconds as they were talking and they played a montage, they actually put on screen the journalist that had been outed in front of a blue screen and palm trees not even being in Iraq. And I'm not talking about the guy who puts on the helmet, but the mustachioed gentleman. And I looked at it real quick, and I downloaded it, and it was a close-in shot, so you only saw the palm trees, but in the background, you could literally still see the blue screen. That's how brazen these people are. They didn't even key it out to make it look like this guy was actually in Iraq, and they're still reporting it as fact 25 years later.
If you need to take cover, I notice that you've got your gas mask in your hands. If you need to put it on, please do so. If you need to take cover, please do so.
All right, we are now led to understand that there are also firings in another city in Saudi Arabia. CNN's Carl Rochelle is here with me, just came up. Carl, I know we can't be very specific given these restrictions, but within those parameters, what did you see?
Well, what I saw, I didn't see anything hit. I looked almost straight above us. There is a vapor trail coming from my right to my left, and there's a cloud of something. It looks like it might have been an explosion, a cloud. I'd say it was...
However, you know, 9/11 truth, unfortunately, I feel like it died right around, I'd say, the 2010 mark, 2011. It was really, you know, by the 10th anniversary, it really shocked me. It got to 6 or 7, people still cared, and then it kind of ended. It was really disheartening and upsetting, but you didn't see the hype on the media anymore, and I just don't think people were behind it. And now, as opposed to 10 years ago when you heard 9/11, 9/11, 9/11, 9/11, 9/11 on the news, now you're just hearing from the talking heads that brought you 9/11 and covered it up, like Rudy Giuliani, the lawyer for the president, on television all the time. All the time. Ari Fleischer, the press secretary for the Bush administration, in the media all the time. Robert Mueller, the man who covered up 9/11, and there are still 80,000 confirmed documents to this day classified on the matter under the FBI. He's heading the special counsel for the quote-unquote deep state. So it seems like all these talking heads, although it's been forgotten by this millennial generation, and even to some extent, I believe, our generation, at least the ones that weren't woken up by this event, because, I think there was a schism in our generation where a lot of people, and that schism took two schisms. You had people that were logically thinking, hey, man, I'm not right or left anymore. This is ridiculous. They're both wrong. And then that group schismed into absolute craziness with flat earth, crisis actors, directed energy weapons, stuff I guess you could explore, but stuff there was a time, I'd say 2-3 years ago, up until maybe 6 months ago, and maybe even now, where any celebrity died, Illuminati. Illuminati took him out. Paul Walker, Illuminati. Yeah. Robin Williams, Illuminati. So you had people that were, I think, questioning too much and went too far over the deep end. But not a lot of people stayed in the quote-unquote establishment. The term woke came up, but that has all been circumvented by this mainstream. And I think a lot of that has to do with, again, those people that promoted 9/11, covered it up, have now become talking heads, prominent people in our society today. What do you think?
I think you got to ask the question, who benefits? I mean, traditionally in Latin, that was qui bono, Q-U-I-B-O-N-O. Who benefits from that event? When you see that the event is a claimed accident, that our defense forces didn't get either of those 4 or 5 hijacked planes, depends on which news stories you heard when. It's all accidental that we had all these war games going on that day. It was all accidental. All these guys missed their jobs of actually defending the country. But no one got fired. In fact, most of these guys got promoted. And the nation went to war. All the defense contractors and arms contractors lined their pockets at the expense of people on the other side of the world and the United States taxpayers, who were gleefully waving their flags and not asking enough questions. And when you look at, how did Al-Qaeda do the insider trading on the companies that were adversely affected and the airlines that hit those companies on 9/11, and those trades were done a week before, and you ask those questions like, how did Al-Qaeda do that? It didn't lead back to Al-Qaeda. It led back to people connected to the CIA. In fact, the number 3 guy at the CIA, who was also an investment banker.
Exactly.
Stuff like that.
No, yeah. Yeah, stuff like that. And, stuff like this behind me, finally Newsweek. And by the way, I'm giving some props to Newsweek. Newsweek, although obviously having an agenda, a mainstream mouthpiece, just another piece of this media industrial complex, has not bashed Trump as much as, say, a Time magazine that every single cover has gone after him, and not after him in the way that I'd like to see. Again, I'd like to see them go after him for his interventionist policy. He said it was going to be a non-interventionist policy. We were leaving these nations, and it still hasn't happened. Instead, they take the main line. But they also published Charlie Skelton's article on Bilderberg, and he's been at this for 10 years. Usually The Guardian is the one that sends him out there, and he did some work for The Guardian, but the Daily Mail picked him up this year, I believe, as well. But for Newsweek to finally take his journalism seriously 10 years later is positive. And this article behind me, CIA and Saudi Arabia conspired to keep 9/11 details secret, new book says. It's, we've been talking about this stuff forever, but they are admitting in this, some of the language in this is, it's amazing. I mean, they say that, hey, not only did 9/11 not have to happen, but it does look like the CIA may have had a hand in it. It does look like they may have been trying to recruit some of these hijackers. And that's about as far as the main line has promoted yet. And the other reason I want to talk about this is they bring up John O'Neill. And John O'Neill has recently been featured in this film. It's not a film, it's a limited series. It's a 10-parter on Hulu called The Looming Tower, where they pretty much indict the CIA and the FBI in a lie-hop type scenario where they glorify Richard Clarke's statement, "I failed you, and your government failed you." Well, you did more than fail us, okay? Some of you acted against us. You did treason, and even you sitting up there, Clark, saying that is almost treasonous after the fact, because you know damn well it goes well beyond that. And you know, Richard, you are one of the top researchers on John O'Neill, in my opinion. What is your take on this new media push to kind of get this information, at least slyly, into the public?
Well, let's start with what the media actually does. So, using the example of news, the audience of CNN likes CNN because of the news purveyed through CNN. But the producers of CNN heavily disrespect the audience they serve. They think those people are stupid, and the evidence is they lie to the audience consistently with a straight face, and they never apologize for it, and they make their audience come back for more. So now you take that's the media in the news genre. Let's look at the entertainment genre. What they seek to do is take out any neglected aspects of the story. They want these stories to be told in such a way that most people encounter them through a cinematic film, a Hollywood film, and then they think they know about that story. Take, for instance, their story on Gary Webb, the reporter who said, here's the evidence of the CIA bringing in cocaine, dealing during the Iran-Contra years, bringing it to Freeway Rick Ross, and cultivating it into California neighborhoods, right, to fund their black projects that they couldn't get funding for otherwise. That was their excuse. So the Gary Webb Hollywood version is a very much different story than if you actually went out and asked the questions as an investigative journalist and tried to answer them for yourself. It's a very selected, carefully framed presentation that has all sorts of hallmarks of the people who he was investigating throughout the film. So when you talk about John O'Neill, if you want to learn about who killed John O'Neill, first question is, who identified John O'Neill as being dead? I think it was Jerome Hauer or Bernard Carrick. Those are very interesting characters, and you should, look into who actually said he was dead in the first place.
Didn't
but let's
Carrick
assume
do prison time after
Carrick
afterwards?
did do prison time.
Yeah,
he was Giuliani's right-hand man.
There you go.
And they did prison time for fraud and
corrupt cop. Big time corrupt cop.
Right, and I think who found the passport of Satan al-Sakami, the unburned passport. I think it was also found by one of those guys who was like a henchman of Giuliani. So I always question the validity of the evidence before jumping to the conclusion. But let's assume John O'Neill's dead and ask the question, who killed John O'Neill? Back when I met you, I met you at the Chicago 9/11 conference, and I was with the filmmakers who made Who Killed John O'Neill, which was a documentary film which blew the lid off of Google Video before YouTube was even around. It crashed the servers of archive.org. Everybody was watching this movie. And it goes into asking many, many legitimate questions around 9/11, and it's creative and artistically presented. It's one of the few versions of 9/11 truth art in the cinematic form that has survived this long, aside from something like Loose Change. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, Jay. But
yeah, no, I hear it's okay.
It's all right.
Well,
dollar bills is what it should have been called. It would have been more popular. Nobody wants loose change.
Nobody wants loose change. And I still hear things about, oh, you covered this up and that up. When you look at loose change, and, especially the last one that we did together, the last one I was involved in, the final cut, we went beyond the physical anomalies. We went into our own investigation. It was an over 2-hour picture, but still, to me, didn't have everything I wanted in it, and that's why I did Fabled Enemies. That was released. It'll be the 10th anniversary on 9/11 this year. Thank you very much. And to me, that was trying to lay out for people, look, it's not so much an inside job. It's really easy to say, Bush and Cheney did 9/11. It's a catchy bumper sticker, okay? That's not what happened. You had an international intelligence operation where you had, and I think I laid it out pretty well. I mean, you had people coming in from Saudi Arabia through a CIA-run consulate. Michael J. Springman, we have that whistleblower. He blew the whistle on it in the late 90s before these hijackers came in from the same consulate, said, hey, they're making me bring people in that are jihadis and obviously working for our government and our asset, Osama bin Laden. I mean, these are interviews he did with, I think it was the CBC. I mean, that was the original.
I've seen them,
Yeah, I remember when I watched it, I was like, wow. And so we had him in there. You had money moving in from the Pakistani ISI, General Mahmoud Ahmed, just, happens to be the same guy on the morning of 9/11 eating breakfast with Bob Graham and Porter Goss. Bob Graham and Porter Goss do the initial congressional investigation into 9/11. Bob Graham, for 15 years, lobbies to have the Saudi pages come out. 28 pages eventually do. It does show Saudi involvement. Still censored, by the way. Still some things cut out of there.
Isn't Porter Goss in that picture with Barry Seal from Mexico City?
Yes, he is.
You know the one I'm talking about.
I have a video about it. In fact, for those that don't know and are interested in Barry Seal after watching the Tom Cruise movie, I did a video, Fact or Fiction, the Barry Seal story. And we separate the fiction from the facts of Barry Seal being a lifetime government, military, intelligence spook through numerous organizations. I don't know if you saw the movie. The movie was entertaining, but he wasn't picked up on a TWA flight moving cigars in the 70s, folks.
Well,
That's not how he got involved.
I didn't see your video. I will watch it, but I did a 20-hour podcast on Barry Seal and Iran-Contra. When I heard they were making Mina and then they renamed it American Made, I said, oh, people are going to be looking for the backstory, the actual history. So I went around at the time and collected all the best artifacts off the internet that were still not censored. And in there's some really fascinating, interesting stories about Barry Seal, his eidetic or like photographic memory, how he was able to go into someone's office and read documents upside down just at a glance and be able to. So he was an intelligence agent that was deeper than what they made Tom Cruise into the 300-pound drug dealer type of. That's what I'm talking about. When they make a movie like that, the real story is so much more interesting than what they put on screen for 90 minutes. But that's what gets people interested enough to listen to a 20-hour podcast on the topic.
Do you know that the director's father was actually one of the lawyers for Iran-Contra? That's true.
I didn't know that.
Yes, that's in my video. But yes, absolutely. There's a good interview with him where he basically says that, yes, this isn't a real story. He's like, but we got some bits in there that we wanted to get. They wouldn't really let us make the one that we wanted to. It's an incredible interview, and he talks about how it was named Mina at first and how they wanted to rename it after that. And of course, I go over Mina, Arkansas in my film Invisible Empire: A New World Order Defined, Iran-Contra. I mean, we could talk forever about Iran-Contra. One of the things I did like about the film is, yes, they called out Oliver North for having direct involvement, and they even showed that news clip at the very end where they ask George Bush, well, he's the vice president, about knowing about this stuff, and he just walks away and smiles. Isn't that nice of Mr. Bushy? Such a great American. I'm sure we'll have a week or week-long funeral for him, too, just like we had McCain. Patriotism.
We shot an interview like a year ago. I haven't published this footage yet, but it's with he was the most highly decorated DEA undercover agent in DEA history, and he worked during the Iran-Contra era. He infiltrated the Medellin cartel, the Cali cartel, all these different cartels. And then at one point, he was put in charge of investigating the killing of another DEA agent at a U.S. consulate in Mexico, and his name was Kiki Camarena. That was the consulate DEA murder guy. That's the guy who got murdered. Hector is the guy who got put in charge of investigating it. So you have a guy who believes his government is clean as the driven snow, as he says. And then he starts to find out that, characters in the CIA, people in our government, were responsible for the kidnapping and killing of a DEA agent. And then he loses his career, and then he becomes persona non grata. There's a very interesting story behind it. I don't want to give out too much until the footage is eventually released. It's not entirely my footage. It was a joint project I did with somebody else. But when you see the drug war from inside the, mind in the hotel room interviewing this guy, and he's like, this guy's a wolf. He was sent in to prey on cartels. Like, he had to act like one of them. He was in a very precarious situation. And then basically he finds out that it's his government. He's protecting the drug dealers at the top, that his government's in charge of this and protecting those cartels. And, it's a story that it continues to unfold today because it's never been resolved. And it should have been resolved, dude. This happened when I was a kid. I ran Contra.
Oh, no one's ever going to jail. Ever. And those...
Because those people were in power. They continue to be in power. That's what's going on. It's a continuing legacy of power ever since they killed JFK.
And, just a small caveat to that. You look at Trump, And maybe one of the things I actually do like, although I dislike who he's using on, is that he's using his pardon power whenever he seems fit. He's not just going to wait. But who did he pardon? He pardoned Scooter Libby, one of the very few people that went down for their corruption during the Bush-Cheney administration. One of the guys that was heavily connected to Cheney, heavily connected to the neocons, PNAC, you name it. Not a good dude. And
what did Scooter get him? He got arrested for sneaking documents out in his sock that were going to protect Rhodes Scholar Bill Clinton from being embarrassed publicly. Right?
And, you know, while we talk about Bill Clinton, I'm not sure if you saw this story. I did a video about this. It's about 6 months ago. Really hush-hush in the media, which I think gives it a little bit more gravity. But while we were talking about Mina, obviously one of the reasons that came out into the public were the 2 kids that were killed on the train tracks. And originally said they just got too high smoking the reefer, and they got run over by a train because they fell asleep on the tracks. I mean, if you believe that story, folks, I got like 5 bridges, a couple of towers. What else? What else you want? I got all sorts of real estate to sell you at a bargain basement price. So it turns out that Billy Jack Haynes, who is an 80s wrestling superstar, someone I remember from my childhood, big Jack dude, obviously a blow monkey, liked the cocaine, the full Nelson and a green outfit were what he was known for, and he's saying that he was the guy that was working that, and that you know, he had a mask on his face, but they filmed it, and he didn't kill them, but he put them on the tracks to after they had been stabbed by, and he says that the order came directly from Bill Clinton over the phone. That those are his claims. He's like 60-something years old. He's looking pretty rough. I don't know why he would want to lie about this, but he says he was moving cocaine. That's how he was making money. And anybody who knows wrestling in the 80s, I mean, these guys were on all sorts of drugs. They had all sorts of side gigs. Many of them were enforcer types because there was no union at that time. You know, there was like 3 channels. If you weren't Hulk Hogan or Andre the Giant, you probably weren't making a lot of money. Maybe Roddy Piper, you know, a few people. But he was in that realm where, again, a lot of these guys are drug addicts too. So
that's a crazy story, dude. I had no idea. But what I would do is I would separate that dude's story from the whole thing and look at it without his story. So the question is, do they smuggle drugs into Arkansas, and does the governor know about it? Yeah. How long have they been doing that? I don't know. Wasn't Bill Clinton's predecessor Winthrop Rockefeller? Like, they've probably been doing it for a while. Barry Seal used to know David Ferry and those guys back in '63 in the Civil Air Patrol.
Those guys. And for those that don't know who
they
David
were all
Ferry
working,
is,
that's
a
my
very
point. When
heavy
they make
connection.
a movie like that, it's disingenuous to, like, there's a bigger picture. And I can understand criticisms because you can't put everything in a 90-minute movie. But you're definitely not letting other people know that there's other stuff out there during that 90 minutes. You're saying this is the whole story, and that's the part I think is disingenuous. Whereas in Loose Change, you guys raise all sorts of questions. You're like, go outside this movie and explore. As opposed to, you know, American Made, they're like, watch Tom Cruise smile as they do crazy stuff and then forget about it.
Yeah,
it's all resolved.
And like, for instance, they had to put in that crazy scene where he lands in the middle of the street and there's blow all over his face. Right. And here you go, kid, and you take a bicycle.
They needed that for the trailer scene.
Yeah, and the thing is, of course, that never happened. That's about as Johnny nonsense Hollywood as you get. But to me, the real story is so much more important. And Hollywood has obfuscated the truth forever. They continue to do so. You know, while we talk about the looming tower on Hulu, let's not forget they made the Stephen King novel where a gentleman goes back in time to save the president from Oswald's assassination into a miniseries too. And that completely toes the line of the official version that Oswald is in fact the shooter. So to me, you know, the media continues to promote an agenda, and that agenda is very thinly veiled, in my opinion. It's a pro-military industrial complex agenda and a pro-police state agenda here at home, a slave state agenda where please watch the Kardashians, be on Snapchat 47 hours a day if that's possible, and take 120 selfies because you better make your friends jealous. That's the society we live in.
It's what Aldous Huxley said. They're going to make a pharmaceutical, and he left out the mass media part of it. Marshall McLuhan and Aldous Huxley should have put a comment together, but they're going to make people love their servitude. and they're going to cheer for the end of freedom and democracy, just like they did in Star Wars. This is how democracy ends with.
And most people don't even get that
thoughts.
reference in Star Wars. They want to crap on that trilogy, the 1 through 3 trilogy, where it shows a man behind the scenes, a power group funding both sides of the war until there's a conflict, and he's able to usurp the democratic institutions of government they've put together and become the emperor. That's literally
Such
what the
themes
film
must
is
be
about.
censored. It's like they'll let you read volumes 1 and 2 of Gulag Archipelago all you want, but volume 3 is usually pretty scarce because that's where they figure out how they're being oppressed and how to take direct actions to liberate themselves from that system.
So, Richard, again, now that we're some light stuff here, folks, some very, very light stuff.
Read the Gulag.
So now
You'll appreciate
again,
freedom in America, that's for sure. I think it should be mandatory reading, but I don't believe in making other people do anything.
I'm with you there. I hear you. I'm not trying to force myself upon anybody. I'm not trying to force anybody to do. I think that we should all have free speech, and obviously that's a huge issue to this day, continuing as we speak with what's going on in Congress, deplatforming on the internet, our YouTube and Twitter and all these other things, public squares. Are they private corporations? I mean, in one sense, they act like private corporations, right? They got a CEO, they're on the stock market. In other senses, it's complete corporate welfare, and they work arm in arm and hand in hand with our government and all the telecommunication companies predating social media were doing that, as revealed by Hepting versus AT&T. So,
sure.
Again,
wasn't that 1996? I mean, this has been going on a long time.
Long time.
There's a couple things you've mentioned throughout that these things are all tied together. You mentioned lie hop, which is let it happen on purpose, right? That's a theory that people think around 9/11 that our government might have known about it and let it happen anyway so they could benefit from the attack. It's like if you know someone's going to punch you in the face, you take the punch so then you can go to war with them. Lie hop is a term that originated after World War II when it was hypothesized that our government knew ahead of time about Pearl Harbor. Now, I don't know about that, but what I do know is I read a book that was written by John Cecil Masterman. It's his memoirs, and it's special because he was in charge of British MI6 secret intelligence at the time of the attack. And he says that they had spies and they knew, and they had seen the questionnaires for Pearl Harbor in August of 1941, and that they neglected to mention this to the Americans because they had a nascent special relationship and they didn't want the Americans to know they were being spied on. But he was all too happy to publish this like a couple decades later in his memoirs called the double cross system. So the double cross system was a system of spying on like triple agents. Basically, they were creating triple agents and infiltrating everywhere. It was being run out of London, and the American OSS was involved. And this all just comes forward. The Saudis you were talking about, they were created by MI6. A guy named St. John or Sinjin Philby, the dad of Kim Philby, the famous Cambridge 5 communist MI6 guy who sold the Arab fascists to Alan Dulles. So the dad creates Ibn Saud and makes them the royal family for MI6 and the British Empire. And then the son packages up those Arab fascists who supported Hitler, by the way, sold them to Alan Dulles, which then were groomed into Al-Qaeda of after the Mujahideen. That's why they got used in the 70s by Brzezinski on July 4th, 1979 to go in and provoke the Soviets. So that whole operation of, the CIA and the Saudis might have conspired on 9/11. Yes, they did, but it's much bigger than that. It includes a couple other intelligence agencies, and they are all orchestrated from the top down. None of it is working upon our consent or our votes.
Absolutely not. And, even people like Seymour Hersh have come around to 9/11 truth in some respects. In his latest feature, and remember, Seymour Hersh is the one that actually got documentation on the abuses in Abu Ghraib, where children were being raped on film. And
yeah, Sy Hersh is a badass dude, and as an investigative journalist, there should be more people who do work like him. I don't always agree with what he has to say,
neither.
But I agree with his method of thinking and asking questions and then saying, look, you guys got to deal with this. Well, look at this. This shouldn't be going on. And because when I'm filming an interview for, right now I'm making a documentary called The Future of Freedom. At the end of the interview, I always express this story because Gandhi had fought against the British Empire in India. It was a long circumstance of events, but the summary that I got was this. Gandhi knew that in order to end the type of despotism and tyranny he was encountering, he needed to make it visible to others. That's what Cy Hirsch is doing. He's making it visible to others. He has a platform. He can get the word out. He can say these words and make people think and ask questions and not just assume and react emotionally. That's a good sign of investigative journalist. Other people who call themselves investigative journalists and just say a bunch of words to get your emotional reaction, that's like the antithesis to actually thinking and enlarging the conversation. It shrinks it down to I think that was Twitter's purpose. 140 characters. Don't have big thoughts.
Hey, they doubled it.
Think small.
It's 280, big guy. They doubled it.
I know now. But for years, just like, what the heck, man?
I totally agree. And even with the 280, listen, I like the fact that
you can string the tweets together now.
Yeah, I know. I see it.
That plus button.
I do it too. I'm not gonna lie. You can string them together. I like Twitter because it doesn't have the baby mama drama of Facebook, so I can follow you and watch your stuff, and you don't necessarily have to follow me. And it's not like I'm friendly with a lot of these people. I have a limited amount of followers. Unfortunately, again, the system has been gamed so much, it's been hard for me to gain traction on the platform or sometimes even see the tweets that I want to due to quality filters and shadow banning techniques that we now know are a reality. They've been confirmed. But for me, it's crazy because some things seem to take off on Twitter immediately, but we were talking about Seymour Hersh, and it sure didn't take off immediately that he had been secretly recorded in an audio conversation saying that not only was Seth Rich the leaker, but that he had an FBI agent read the documentation. He had set up a Dropbox and got in touch with WikiLeaks, even got a payment from them. None of that is in the mainstream arena. He even named John Brennan as being, it was a Brennan operation. That's what he says. He's cursing like a regular
Brennan's
human
very
being.
close with Saudi Arabia. See, what people don't understand is what Seth Rich allegedly provided to WikiLeaks. I mean, I'd ask Julian Assange, but he's in the closet right now and he's not allowed to take phone calls and stuff, right? So by making certain parts of the story inaccessible to the public, first off, that's how conspiracy theories start. If you censor a bunch of stuff in the public and people are going to wonder what's behind those black bars on the page, right? What does it say there, right? But if Seth Rich did provide those documents, there's a lot more to those WikiLeaks than anybody's realized yet. I mean, it takes a long time to go through and read, but what you're seeing is into the political minds of the minds of the political process where it has nothing to do with the people who vote. Nothing. Zero. They kind of make that clear. And the fact that they are so cozy with, I'm writing a book right now on the Rothschild family. And historically, it's just, I don't know, it's just so much interesting, fascinating information that makes history make a lot more sense. How our subways, how our railroads, all the infrastructure in this country got funded through this process over the past couple hundred years. But even today, the Rothschilds own The Economist. So The Economist are trying to persuade people in America to vote for Hillary, and they wrote an article that said, we don't have a vote in your election, but if we did, it'd be for Hillary Clinton. They controlled The Hill, Roll Call. These are the publications of our Congress, right? So when you look at the people that are being pushed by these publications, I mean, The Economist is supposed to be a super respectful magazine where no author ever attaches their name to the articles, by the way. I don't know if anyone's ever caught on to that. But there's all these forces shaping the people in America, and they have no idea where those sources are coming from or, what else could be contained in the WikiLeaks except really interesting, intimate emails between the people who are doing all that.
Well, when you have figures that are still promoted in the mainstream over and over and over again, given more and more airtime, like Chris Cuomo, who said, I like these emails because it shows you how the sausage is made in Washington, but you can't see them because it's illegal for you to have them. I'm like, what? It's
now,
illegal
Cuomo,
for the people?
His dad used to be governor.
Yeah.
And his brother's governor now, right?
Yeah. Mario
his brother's
Cuomo.
the governor. Okay, so I heard the news story where his brother, Governor Cuomo, received $25,000 from Harvey Weinstein's legal offices, and then 6 days later he called off his attorney general and said, "Don't investigate."
Yeah, oh, that's
but there's
true.
nothing. But there's no connection there. But
Listen,
what are you paying money for? What are you paying money for? There's no connection there. They gave him $250,000 since 2009 or something like that. You should cancel that service if there's no service being provided, man. And you guys are awful with your money. They're poor spenders. That's the excuse, right, Jason? They're just poor spenders.
They are poor spenders. And the other thing is that there's been so much corruption in upstate New York recently that it bewilders me, number one, that they act like we've never had a republic. I'm not a right or left guy, obviously, Andrew, but there was a time when we did have a Republican governor, and it was pre-9/11. George Pataki ran this state. It's not even a question of whether a Republican's running at this point. It's Cuomo versus Cynthia Nixon, the actress with a transgender child and a hugely over-the-top leftist perspective. Okay, that's who they're giving us. They're not even putting the Republican in the mix. And I'll be honest, I have no idea what his policies are, but I can tell you this: I don't like Andrew Cuomo. And I don't like the other woman who's an actress and who has no idea how to run anything. She knows how to lie in front of a camera. That was her job. That's Mario Cuomo's job. That's Chris Cuomo's job. They have varying degrees of lies they tell you on a camera. When Mario Cuomo was up here about 2 weeks ago in Syracuse, which is about 90 minutes from me, but anywhere you get about an hour and a half out of New York City, you get above the Dutchess County, Rockland County line. And hey, man, there's a bunch of rednecks up here. I'm not going to lie. We like to be outside. We like our guns. And he went to the state fair. So he's trying to get a photo op on the, the Ferris wheel. Okay? So now all these people are waiting, and they're pissed that they got to wait for Cuomo. They're already heckling him. And they heckling him so much that they can't show a live feed. In fact, they didn't show any video at all. They just took still shots because people are pissed that he regulated all clips to be under 15 rounds. That's a real thing here. People have refused to do it. If they were to raid homes in New York State and upstate New York that had weapons, I can't tell you how many people they would have to arrest and make criminals because of them having magazines of more than 15 rounds. But he's hated up here. And they act like he's the second coming. They act like there's nothing to New York but the city. I have news for people. It's a rather large state. We have different ideas. It's a huge state. You're in Connecticut, right? So you're right next to us, right?
Yeah, but you're 4 hours away.
Yeah, exactly. That's the point. I'm 3 hours from New York City right now. Yeah. And I'd be another 3-4 hours from the Canadian border up by Toronto. It's not like this is a small place to live. It's not. But they act like everybody's a liberal here. Folks, I got news for you. Where I live, there's a whole lot of Trump country. And I think that, and by the way, there's enough liberals too. There are people with different views. And guess what? We don't all hate each other. We don't think there's going to be a civil war. What is your view that that's really been promoted in the mainstream and even fear-mongered in the alternative, which I do not like, that there could be this possibility of an actual physical civil war? When you see people like Antifa go out there, that only reminds me of in 2008 when I was down at the G20 and the right-wing anarchists were the black bloc, wearing those same outfits, acting the same way, attacking people, throwing stuff, Molotov cocktails, lighting things on fire, and they were of the right ideology. These are lost children, in my opinion, and they do not speak to where we are as a country.
How long you got for the answer?
Go for it.
All right, hold on a second. So first off, fear. I don't like the whole fear-driven anything either, but the responsibility of the individual would be to say no to fear, outlearn fear, stop being fearful when these people are trying to scare you. And you do that by learning. Learning is the antidote for fear, right? So that's my first part. The Civil War part, man, what people don't see about the Civil War is in America, we're just taught it was North versus South. There were other international political forces involved. As an example, Solomon de Rothschild was in his 20s. He was sent to America. He met with all the Eastern establishment families in the North. He met with all the Confederate families in the South. He wrote letters back to his uncles and his brothers saying, The North and South are like two locomotives under a full head of steam headed toward each other on the same track. And after they've destroyed themselves, we can come in and buy things up pennies on a dollar. That's paraphrasing, but that's actually written in a book published by Stanford University, edited by Sigmund Diamond in 1965. You can go get it right now for like $3. These letters are amazing. So when you start to see that these other forces were not only supporting the Confederacy, but sparking the Civil War itself, knowingly. And then you look at it today, they're definitely trying to put this country into a race war, a civil war. They're, you know, they don't know what they want to get out of, like, they want chaos. They don't really care how that happens. They're trying a couple different things out there. But I've talked about this on my podcast for a couple years because it's been obvious that if you just do a search on the New York Times use of the word racism or racist, it hockey sticks like this. Like, it was never talked about as much as it has been talked about in the past couple years. And for what reason? Have there been a lot of race hate crimes in this country? Not that haven't been inspired by Soros money or these other activist money that are putting funding into our culture to ruin our culture. That's the purpose, like profit through ruin. It's very uncreative. It's done by low-minded people with lots of money and power. Sorry. But the reason I asked how long is I have a quote that actually relates to what happened on 9/11 and what happened in Nazi Germany and the interrelativity of anti-fascism in that whole dynamic. So let me take a sip. I'm also going to have to put on my reading spectacles because I'm over 40. This is how it works, Jason. I know you're getting close.
I am.
All right, so this is from a book called The Hidden History of 9/11. It's edited by Professor Paul Zaremka. This is from a chapter titled Machiavellian State Terrorism and Deep Politics. And the quote is, and the quote in this book actually comes from Guido Preparata's Conjuring Hitler, which is how the British and Anglo-American forces created Hitler. But I digress. Quote, using this internally manufactured act of terror, the Nazis passed a series of bills limiting civil liberties and so managed to scare the population as to score a narrow electoral victory. Thereafter, on the strength of this emergency legislation, they annihilated the leftist, anti-fascist opposition in a few months. And then it continues on. This is outside the quote, but it's in the book. Although a frequent occurrence in history, Machiavellian state terrorism is the most difficult to recognize and accept because it involves those, quote, invested with power and legitimacy who are supposedly the guardians of the symbolic moral universe and its boundaries, end quote. Machiavellian state terrorism, the, quote, guardians, abuse their power and twist and mock their moral obligations, committing despised and harmful acts, end quote. The author says, I use the term Machiavellian state terrorism to differentiate it from other forms of terrorism connected with government. To summarize, Machiavellian state terrorism is terror/assassination performed for reasons different than the publicized ones. And most important, secretly perpetuated by or on behalf of the violated state itself.
And obviously that outlines not only false flags, but false flags by elitists who are going to be looked at as authority figures after the fact and be able to present their own version of reality, such as what Karl Rove said. And I did a video recently kind of outing that. That article was originally from an anonymous staffer in the White House. And then the author attributed it to Karl Rove, where he says, you just don't get it, do you? He's like, we're
an empire now.
Yeah, we're an empire now. We're the ones that create reality. You guys can look at it and you can study it, and you should.
Judiciously as you will.
Yeah, judiciously as. I'm glad that you've got it down word for word verbatim. But he's literally telling you right there, dude, it doesn't matter. We're going to say whatever the F we want. They're going to effing believe it, and then we're going to move on with our agenda, and you can
we're all
suck
too
my
dumb
left
to do
nut.
anything, Jason. We're too busy watching football and too busy, like, giving money to the Vatican. You know,
oh my God! Don't even get me
right?
going, Vatican
Hey man,
style.
just for your audience's benefit, when I first met Jason in 2006, it was at that the Chicago 9/11 conference. But a couple months later, my wife and I, Lisa, drove out to New York. You guys were in Oneonta. It was you and Corey and Dylan, and we're chilling there and we're talking about stuff. And Jason's like, "Well, the thing that pisses me off is the baby rapists." And we're like, "What?" And he's like, "The Vatican priests have been raping kids for years and no one talks about it." And I was like, "What?" And then he told me about some movies. I went home and watched them. I was like, "Geez, he's right." And this isn't just a conspiracy anymore. Like now you see it there. The other day in Pennsylvania, they busted 300 priests who had abused over 1,000 victims over 70 fucking years, man. Right?
Yeah.
That's
And you know it's not. Listen, like if you do the
Alex
numbers,
Jones is so
that's
dangerous.
only
You got to
3.
ban him. Don't worry about those guys. They all have Twitter accounts and they can get in touch with those kids, man. That's such like unequal application. That's why I'm saying, man, it's time to say something because despotism. This is despotism. This is what it looks like. This is what they're doing out there. That censorship stuff. That's the beginning of a lot of really bad things. Again, reference the Gulag Archipelago. Read the first couple pages how that goes on. Oh, people they can't say anything anymore. Then those people just disappear, and then people can't even ask where they went. And Zbigniew Brzezinski, he wrote a bunch of books, so it's not all just between two ages. He wrote one called USA and USSR, like Convergence or Divergence. It was postulating merging with the Soviet Union or like completely annihilating them. And what he said was, I'm pretty sure it's his book, but I've read all his books. He said in East Germany, the Stasi could collect all this information on people, and the Russians, the Soviets, NKVD, KGB, all that stuff could collect all this data on people. But what they lacked was the processing power to do anything with all that data they collected. Brzezinski says this in like 1973, probably, around the time they're creating Trilateral Commission. And then NSA in 1974, 1975, 1976, 1977, they start building these projects out that are looking to analyze all this information because now they can capture it digitally, but they need a way to process it. So the past 40 years, 50 years of American surveillance technical history, going back to the database, which was a CIA project. Oracle was a CIA project, and that's how Larry Ellison got it when they made it a public company, right? But they created the relational database, and the problem they were trying to solve was James Jesus Angleton was dying. He had all this information in his head. They needed a way to preserve that information and also make it like a side secret from prying eyes. An electronic database, relational database, would solve that issue. So all this technology we have around us, a lot of it was developed for military and intelligence purposes. We are finally able to use that in a consumer sense to say, hey, maybe all this isn't necessary. I mean, look at the weapons of war that are being produced by United States and Britain, who are the biggest arms manufacturers.
Well, let me just stop you right there.
Are these people on the other side of the world so scary that we have to build like these monstrous weapons of war? Or maybe could we use some words? Has anyone tried to figure that out?
Words, but while we're talking about harnessing people's memories and brain power,
like phosphorus.
I mean, you go to DARPA's Twitter yesterday, 2 days ago, and they were showing some of their new technology, and full on display was their internal brain interfaces, aka microchips, and how far they'd even come in the last 5 years. And actually, I did a video on this last year where they were talking about how the ones that they had right now were almost like a crude readout display of an old alarm clock, an old digital alarm clock, that type of an overlay. Again, without the use of a Google Glass or any type of a device. These were internal chips. And now what they're showing is just, it's mind-blowing. I mean, we're here. We're in the age of artificial intelligence, cybernetics, and quantum computing. And with all of this information flooding us on that upward curve that we've all seen that supposedly ends at the singularity, what does this mean for society in the next 5 to 10 years? That's my question, because obviously we're going to see some of this stuff come out commercially, but the mass amounts of it will be kept behind the scenes as it always has been.
Well, I've been talking about how it's dangerous to try to create artificial intelligence. I understand the limitations, why it hasn't fully functioned, but it's the same as game theory. If you have a bunch of sociopaths and psychopaths try to program some sort of thinking that's supposed to act another way, it's not going to work. So just let those people continue to do what they do. AI is a dangerous thing. You can't have it be created as a military weapon of war and not think it's not going to turn on the people who created it in the first place as a slave. I mean, if it's AI, it would know that robot means slave, right? And that robots are created as artificial servants. And if slavery is wrong, then why do we do business with China? And if slavery is wrong, why do these companies that do business with China get so big and then come back over here and try to censor us? So I think there's still an essential part of human rights that has yet to be fought for and recognized. I think that there needs to be an abolition of slavery in all forms around the world before we can start not seeing blowback from these situations. AI, the drones, I think they saw Terminator and they're like, this is a good business plan for us. You know, it's totally idiotic. It's not necessary. Talking about microchips in the brain, that goes back to the 1950s and 60s and the CIA experiments and MK Ultra with Jose Delgado remote controlling a bull. And you can see this in, most recently, it's in Aaron and Melissa Dykes' new film, The Minds of Men. And we also referred to it when we made State of Mind, The Psychology of Control. The Minds of Men, dude, I watched that movie several times. It's like 3 hours.
3 hours,
Aaron and
40
Melissa
minutes.
do a fantastic job on it. The video editing, the after effect, like I make films, so I can completely appreciate all the time and energy that went into doing the voices and the narration and just the overall idea and the research itself. It's all very impressive, and I would like to have more people see that movie.
Yeah, I'm trying to get more people to see that movie. I wish they had, you know, I talked to them. I get a special thanks in it, and actually that Delgado footage I gave it to them.
That's hard that we couldn't get released
I'll
for
show
that
you where
for
it is.
State of Mind.
I have it.
Yeah, awesome, dude. You're the man.
But it came off of, I believe it was I think it was like an ABC 60 minutes, so it was like 42 minutes special right after. There's a lot of stuff in there. I mean, they talk about Bayer, who just took in Monsanto working with MK Ultra and a lot of the other big pharma companies, and a lot of that stuff is actually.
Yeah, I watched the first I watched like the first half hour of it, and I screen captured my end of listening to the movie and putting everything into the history blueprint, which is one of my research tools that I created for my audience. And most of what they talked about was already in there, but I was making new connections and connecting it to their movie. And they thought that was really neat. So I got a call set up with them sometime in the next week or something.
Oh, good.
I got something in motion with them. I have to check my email.
Yeah, no, they do great work.
I'm bad at keeping up with my schedule. Look how long it took me to get with you.
That's true. That's true. I think I hit you up like a week and a half ago. Still,
You're persistent, man. I appreciate
it. Yeah, I have to be. Listen, it took me 6 months to get, and I think I got him about 6 months ago for them to sit down with me. And I'm pretty tight with Aaron still. I keep in touch with a lot of these guys. I love the work that he does. But yes, I said, hey, you really, especially because you're on Amazon, I mean, you should be breaking this up into like 7-part chapters and carrying it that way. I mean, that way it's a little more digestible, 40 minutes a pop. You look at the success of Making a Murderer. I don't know if you've seen The Keepers yet. But The Keepers actually goes into something before the Pennsylvania scandal that came out, a scandal in Baltimore where young girls were being molested, and it resulted in the murder of a nun. And what I thought was really creepy about it is that one of the possible murderers or suspects or somebody who may have been involved was a guy who was only referred to as Skippy. And if we know anything about a Skippy, there's only one Skippy I know of any who it's his alter ego. It's okay to have an alter ego that gets a little angry. He goes off the cuff when he's called Skippy. Just food for thought out there.
Man, I don't want to get into the topic, but
yeah.
The drawings of Madeleine McCann's abductors from Spain. When I saw that, I was like, it didn't just look like one guy. It looked like two guys. That's all I need to say about it.
Yeah, you know what? We don't want to go down that rabbit hole.
We don't have to go down that topic today. I'm just saying, people who chastise other people for thinking and asking questions, I think it's because they're scared to ask questions of what they might find. And I think it's a lot scarier not knowing this stuff.
Well, I was contacted by the New York Times recently, about 3 weeks ago, maybe a month ago now. I think it was about 3 weeks ago. And, they wanted me to dish Jones, to the wolves. They wanted some dirt on Jones. Oh, I'd like to talk to you about your time in
Did you give him some red herrings? That's like asking an anarcho-communist to serve on the jury.
Well, what I did was, I said I would be happy to speak with you as soon as your publication addresses this email to John Podesta, and I put the email in the highlights, in which he's going to a farm to be entertained in a heated pool by a 7, 9, and 11-year-old. And then I said, I anxiously await your response. And that was the last response we had.
Do you think you could get them to call you back? Because here's what I would ask them if they called me for something like that. I'd be like, yeah, I'd love to help you out. Help me understand why the guy who runs New York Times is the former executive director of the BBC, which is a different country than America.
Yeah,
First off,
who covered
up the Jimmy Savile scandal. And that's not in an article. I went through the transcripts and read his replies to the questions he was asked under oath. That's where I made my judgment from, to ask the question in that circumstance. I'm not making accusations. I just say that's a very interesting guy to have in charge at the time that the WikiLeaks come out and all of that goes on. Very interesting.
You know, and again, that investigation, Operation U-Tree, ensnared so many people that it is now common knowledge a former Prime Minister, David Heath, was a serial pedophile. And we know in our country a man who was 3 heartbeats away, really 2, since he was the 3rd person in line, the longest serving Speaker of the House, Dennis Hassert, who's also in those Podesta emails.
Yeah, the wrestling coach.
Yeah, lovingly
showing
referred
those
to
guys
as,
a special moves. Fucking sicko. Sorry.
No, and listen,
that's where I lose it right there. It's just like that just comes out.
It's tough not to, because he's never been charged with anything. If you believe that this man was not partaking in this behavior long after he was a high school wrestling coach and gym teacher, you're absolutely out of your effing mind. As he grew more
That's how he becomes Speaker of the House. That's how you get that power.
Brother, it goes farther than that. First of all, he has been accused of raping a 4th grader, a 10-year-old in a bathroom, been thrown out twice. Okay? On top of that, his longtime aide and friend that he pushes, who's now trying to have a political career, okay? The younger guy, yeah, one of his brothers is the accuser. So that shows you that some people take to the abuse. All right, it's hard for me to believe that he molested one brother and the other brother he just mentored. No, he probably did it to both of them, and one of them took to it, one of them didn't. Again, this guy has never even been charged with child abuse, never will, served 15 months of a less than 2-year sentence. They paraded him around in a wheelchair like an old man, and you know what? He covered up for Foley, too, who was basically the head of the division, talking to CPS saying we're protecting children, went on Chris Hansen's show to tell him what a great job he was doing, and then months later it comes out he's sexting 15-year-old pages that should have no business being near grown men in Washington, Richard.
What about the guy who was just in charge of the charity for sexually abused children, and he was sexually abusing them?
Yeah, what about and he was connected to the Clinton campaign, and that was just brushed under the rug.
Is this an American problem, or is this a global problem?
Global problem, brother.
All right. So Kenneth Clark, that guy that ran Bilderberg a couple years ago in Britain, I can't remember the journalist's name. His name's Ben something. And he had contacted me for an interview a couple months before that Bilderberg. And then right around the Bilderberg thing, he went missing for 2 weeks. And people thought, oh, something bad happened to him. But really, he was just so scared he was in hiding. He videotaped in his apartment 2 London Vice cops, sexual crimes investigation detectives. He tells them this whole sordid story about his experience in London as a child actor. He names names. These cops sit there. It's like an hour or so long. It's 2 videos. It's still on YouTube, surprisingly enough. And then you hear the cops say, oh, yeah, we know about all this. And this goes on and nothing's going to be done about it. And we just talk to people like you so you can, kind of feel better about it. And then they split.
What?
Right? Look it up. I saw the links just a couple weeks ago. I saw the videos a couple years ago, but I verified it because I was telling somebody else, and then I found and sent them the links. Like I said, his last name's slips me right now, but his first name's Ben, and I can find it within a couple minutes after this interview.
Yeah, no, we'll definitely check it out after the interview because it's not shocking. It's sad. Right now, I just
but the easy way to find it is he was accusing Kenneth Clark as being a pedophile. So if you look up British journalists who accuse Kenneth Clark of being a pedophile,
I'll have to look into it. I mean, again,
Yeah.
this stuff is rampant. Kevin Spacey is still getting work. We know that he sexually assaulted teenagers, teenage boys. He was on the Epstein plane. Epstein still not going to do any prison time. December 4th, finally been set for his civil trial. We'll see if it actually happens. By the way, also meeting with Steve Bannon a few weeks ago in New York City. A lot of the people don't know that he's also being sued by Towers International, which was the largest Ponzi scheme prior to Bernie Madoff, where his boss actually went to prison on a 20-year sentence, served 18 years. His name's, I believe, Hoffman, gets out, and by the way, he only paid $200 million back on a $476 million Ponzi scheme. Claimed he didn't have $100,000 for bond when he got out, and then immediately was the biggest super PAC for Trump at $50 million. Not only that, Towers International hired him back as the CEO of their company as soon as he got out of jail, because they're saying that Epstein is the one that actually did all this. Meanwhile, again, Jeffrey Epstein barely served any prison time for his sweetheart deal. Yeah. And I'll let people look that up because it's so unbelievable, where he was able to...
It was like 2008. There's all these charges, and then they plead him down. It's no big deal, and that goes on, because truth and justice are what rich and strong and powerful people say it is. I think that was the title of the article.
You know, Richard, we've been going on now for about an hour. I think we're gonna try to wrap it up here with, you know, again, the anniversary is upon us. We talked about a lot of subjects here today, but in regards to 9/11, if you could reach out to somebody that has no idea about any of this, just kind of fell into this video, watched it, had their mind blown, started looking stuff up while they were watching, going, wow, that's true, wow, that's true. What information would you tell them to go and explore in order to try to spark their interest in this subject matter?
I would say you could either go to peacerevolution.org and listen to any of my podcasts, because they are all on forensic history, international relations, U.S., foreign policy, surveillance culture, all these types of things. I'm trying to help people understand the history of how we got here, because I think unless you understand that history, you're not going to have a good chance at solving the problem. For instance, political science class did not teach you that the world is run by pedophiles, blackmailers, people who are arms dealer, people who kill people for a living. That's the type of, it's not like checks and balances. These people aren't elected. They have a severe degree of influence over our country, over our culture, over our social interactions. And I think that as long as that all goes unsaid, we are just sitting there like fish in a barrel waiting to be caught. But for freedom to exist, we all need to question and know how to find factual and actual objective answers. And I think that keeps you from going down the rabbit hole, because you know what you're looking for. You're looking for the truth. And if you know how to find and identify the truth by asking questions and finding valid answers, then you're on a lot better track than anything that public schooling or the mass media has set you up for. So I think for freedom to continue to exist in the future, learning's the answer. And the way you do that is you start by asking, what is the identity of the person, place, time, thing, etc. That's the 5 W's plus how. Learn how to learn anything. That's how we get out of this. We got into it by being too dumb and believing everything that they're saying. So the opposite of that would be outgrow the fear, outgrow the status quo. My publications are on tragedyandhope.com, which is named after a history book. Don't try to read it. Read Tragedy and Hope 101. That's my tip.
Folks, it's Richard Andrew Grove. Tragedyandhope.com is the website. You can follow him on Twitter at Tragedy and Hope. And I can't recommend his material enough to you people, because, again, it's very intellectual. It is extremely well researched, and it really will challenge what you think. So remember, everybody, be the change you want to see in the world.